So, Memories of Ice is pretty great so far. I finished book two of it, so I'm a little less than halfway through, but I think I'm at the structural halfway point. And yeah, I think this might be, it'll probably be the best Malazan book so far. Definitely a big step up from the last two, if it keeps up its current level of quality. But it is a pretty hard competition because Gardens of the Moon did have more crop than this has, so, it has that point in its favor. But so this video is going to be my kind of mid-book update on where I am, what's happening, how I'm generally feeling about the book, but I'm not going to try and analyze it very much, definitely not from a thematic level. This is more to just talk about the plot and, the general impressions I have of the characters, and that way, when I do a more full discussion with, the others from the podcast, we can kind of skip over some of the recap, because I've already mentioned those things here, and we can focus on, the more interesting discussions. I don't want to have to do a full, and there was this scene and that was fun, and there was this scene and that was interesting in the podcast. I don't even want to do too much of it here. I just want to get some things out of the way here, and also, let you know where I am in terms of expectations for the rest of it, although I don't have a ton of expectations, but discussing while you're in the middle of a book is different from discussing it at the end. And honestly, the plot has been so dense in this book, and it's been so fun trying to follow and track all the details, that I haven't even really had a mind for analyzing theme. I've been having so much fun just, going full conspiracy about how these things are connected and just enjoying the characters that themes are not really my focus right now. And plus, I think, at least for me, it's hard to figure out the themes of a Malazan book in the first half. So far, the first half is a lot of setup, and there can be theme and setup. There are usually really good themes in the prologues, but then, it takes really the second half before the full statements come together. And so the first thing I want to say about this book is that the prose is very strong. It's a lot more readable than I think the last two books, and that's not to say the last two books had bad prose, just that, you can read a book with good prose, and you can read a book with great prose, and like great prose is 10 times better than good prose, That's just how it goes. And I think the series has always been very capable of, compelling metaphors and descriptions of strong aesthetic qualities in the prose, but there's, the way I look at prose at least, is that there's the aesthetic qualities and there's the sort of readability, the addictability to it. And there are books with, addictive prose to read that don't necessarily have expressive aesthetic qualities to them, whether it be, that's a beautiful line or just it pulling you into a character or even horrifying you perhaps. And those books, that focus on readability, they work great because they can, get their aesthetic qualities in through the story and the characters rather than the prose. And on the flip side, well, also the other thing about those books is that as much as they can work great, they are just not using one of the powerful tools of a book as much. And on the flip side, there's prose with really strong aesthetic qualities, but it might not be readable, and a lot of older books are like that. And, obviously readability is subjective. It's about, what you're used to, what you like reading. But I do find that when you push aesthetic qualities further, when you do more complex sentence structures or diction, or just are doing more interesting things with, what information you skip over and how you flow from sentence to sentence, often the readability suffers, and that just means that you need to have your readability keep up with your aesthetic qualities, or else, that doesn't mean it'll be bad without that, just that it'll be harder to read, it'll be more effort. And I've found that the prior two books sometimes would land in that space where it wasn't that it was bad prose, but the aesthetic qualities and the complexity that comes with them exceeded the readability qualities. And now I found not only have the aesthetic qualities improved in Memories of Ice, but I think the readability has also seriously improved to keep up with it, and it's made it just, especially early on, an enthralling, addictive read for me. I was constantly thinking I'll read for half an hour before to go to bed, and then I read for 2 hours because it's just so readable and fun, and the prose is a big part of why. And I think something it's also strong at here, which Erikson I think has always kind of gone for but really came into its own here, was its ability to make characters pop out with an interesting voice immediately. Because a lot of characters, sort of on paper, they're not necessarily fantastic. Like if I were to break down, what is this character's inner conflict? What is their personality? What is the arc they go through? They wouldn't necessarily seem like the best character ever, or even that remarkable. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, it's just that not every character needs to be that. But then those characters are so engaging anyway, because they sort of, it's as though the characters are not always what's great, it's just how the book presents character is great. And I think this is really apparent with the, Fenner's priests there with the Mortal Sword and the Destriant and Itkovian, what was his name? Itkovian was the shield anvil, where all three of them, I'm not going to say they have like my favorite inner conflicts. I certainly don't like personally resonate with their lives in the way I might more so with someone like Crocus or Ganos, but it's just reading from their perspectives really works. And I think, especially from the military angle, in that there's always been a military component to Malazan, but Whiskey Jack really didn't do it for me in book one. And he wasn't really in a military plotline, he was just a military perspective, but either way I found him boring. And book two, I mean, there were some strong aspects to Duiker and Coltane's story, but I just didn't resonate with it that much. I wasn't pulled in. There was a lot of stuff I could tell it was going for, but I don't think I had, the best possible experience you could have with that plotline, which I know a lot of people did. But, Itkovian and the for some reason I remember the other two, the Destriant and the Mortal Anvil, by their titles, but I remember Itkovian by his name, but he's the Shield Anvil. But those three in general, they all work, but they sort of capture that. I think this is something that for me can finally sort of stand next to the Black Company. It's not as good, but it stands near it in terms of that military perspective, that suppression of emotion, that mechanicalness to how they approach and deal with their conflicts, where there's still individuality to them, there's still personality, but part of that personality is they don't necessarily engage with the emotional drivers as much. They sort of suppress those, but you can also tell they're still there, especially as they deal with horrible situations. And I guess since I'm talking about that plotline, seeing them deal with the military situation of the Kachin Shamal, great. Seeing them deal with the message from Quick Ben was really interesting. Seeing them deal with some of the politics was engaging too, where, again, it's like, are they my favorite characters ever? No. But the way the book writes characters, the way we just see their perspective, their competence, is just really engaging. And I think the defining quality of Memories of Ice so far is it is just a huge book. And the prior two books already felt huge. Gardens of the Moon was already a sprawling epic with so many perspectives and factions and individuals with different agencies. Those worlds do not feel small in the last two books, but it feels bigger now. Like, those last two conflicts were still ultimately feeling like they were kind of confined to their localized issues, which is very relative because compared to a lot of other books, they are not localized at all. But, now the perspective has expanded because now it's not just about the Malazan Empire and a rebellion it's dealing with and then, a few other magic things like Ikarium's backstory or whatnot. So we have, a Ghost Jagut and the Kachin Shamal are back and the Chained God has all these plans and Karul has all these plans and, Lady Envy's doing things and, like, all these things. And reading this book, especially, part one, book one, it's just like, okay, we are setting the stage properly for Malazan Book of the Fallen. Like, the first two feel like a prologue now. I'm sure there were hints, there was foreshadowing, there were things that on reread, I'm sure they'd stick out as setting up this stuff all along. But now it's like we've sort of set the stage for some of the elements of the full epic. And I'm sure it's not all the elements. I'm sure there's still so much we don't know, so many factions and players we haven't met yet. But, like, the final book is called The Crippled God, and we learn why they're a problem here. And that's honestly pretty interesting because they are pushing the issue in a way, the Crippled God, they're pushing the issue in a way where it's like, it feels almost like they need to be dealt with this book, but then they seem like they kind of have to keep being the villain throughout the whole series. And, who knows if they're the villain? Malazan is a complicated series. It can play with your expectations. For all I know, they're the hero of the final book, but the Crippled God nonetheless is sort of they're being set up here, and their conflict is definitely something that could last for 8 more books. But I hope the way the Chained God, the Chained One, Mr. Chains, I'm just faster to say Mr. Chains, I hope the way Mr. Chains is handled is not just like every book, they're kind of the Sauron or whatever, the cliche of like, oh, I'm going to send out a few more minions to do my planning on this continent, but then we only get to dealing with them at the end. Like, I hope it's a more interesting conflict than that, especially because I don't want to see them handled as just a villain, because there's already an obvious thematic narrative with them that, this conflict is ultimately caused by someone who experienced more pain than anyone else lashing out. And there's a lot to play with there, and, that doesn't justify what they're doing, but it does, there's room to say things there where it'll be disappointing if it's just like, oh, they felt all this pain, but we had to stop them. It should be more of a situation where the way we deal with it is more complex than that. And I do really like the premise of the Chained God, just the whole concept that they just really wanted to beat Kalor, they called down another god, and that went really wrong, but as part of their plan to kill them, but then they just messed up a whole lot of things, and out of all that pain and spite, the chained god is now trying to mess everything up. Although that was, 100,000 years ago that they showed up. And at this point, it seems like only a few thousand years ago did they start being a cancer on burn. And I wonder if there's more detail to why it took so long. Maybe it just took them that long to pull themselves together. But I think the sealing was also implied. Now I can't remember. They talk about the chaining, and I can't remember if the chaining was a few thousand years ago or, back when they first showed up. I think it was earlier. Maybe it was sometime in between. I don't know. I can't remember every detail, though. I remember a lot. Anyway, we should talk about the prologue for real, actually, because I'm talking about how big this book is, how large the scale is, and the prologue, I think, sets that up in a fantastic way, because it sets a sense of scale. We're talking about events 300,000 years ago. We're talking about events 100,000 years ago, and so many of those things are implying things even older with the K'chain Shamal. And, first we get the T'lana Mas and, Kalava's whole mistake with, eventually freeing the K'chain Shamal, and that look at the Jagged conflict. I really like how the Jagged T'lana Mas conflict is a connecting thread between books, and we see more and more sides of it each time. And I do want to see more complexities to that, maybe just more Jagged perspectives directly than we've necessarily gotten so far, because, how do I put this? I think this series has given good indicators that it's going to do more than just a standard cycle of violence theme, that it has more complexities to it than that. I just still, I've been saying this for like this whole, the whole podcast, but I don't know what that statement is yet. And of course, I'm 25% of the way through the series. Maybe I'm not supposed to know yet, but I want to know. I want it to be more complex than just, cycle of violence bad, because, I think we all know, Erickson, I assume, knows that, how you deal with these historical conflicts, part of it is letting go of hate, but it's not the only part. And, I have reasons to trust it on that. For one thing, I think the scenarios it gives us, like this prologue itself, are way more interesting than just to every character is defined by the cycle of violence. It feels a little more honest, where every character is reacting realistically and it's just a horrible situation. And it feels like it's realistic like that, in spite of the fact that the T'lana Mas do kind of have a single-minded desire to just kill Jagged. Although that's also, it is kind of funny, and maybe it's something we shouldn't treat as funny because how dark it is, it's genocide, but there's various points during the main plot where someone mentions a Jagged or a Jagged word, and that every T'lana Mas is just perks up like they're cats, and you just opened a tuna can, and that's funny. But then we get to the Kalor and Karul situation, which is just a fantastic, fantastic scenario where I don't even need to know the characters or the context, just being dropped in, having a little context explained, and just seeing the choice Kalor makes. That's a choice that's definitely going to have thematic implications, even if I don't fully have a view of what the themes are yet. That's just something to think about, that he decided to kill everyone, just to sort of assert his ownership over them rather than let it be taken away from him. Reminds me a bit of Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. They're not really similar, but there's a little bit similarity there. And the curses they give each other are interesting, and it's just a great scene, and it has the funniest, most perfect Black Company reference I have ever read. It made me laugh so much I had to take a picture of the page and send it to a friend of mine who's read The Black Company, and I didn't even have to explain it. He read the page and he knew exactly what the reference was. It was hilarious. And if you know, you know. I'm not even going to say it, but if you know, you know. And if you don't know, then reread that. If you've read The Black Company, but you're like, I don't know what reference you mean, reread it. Think about the end of Shadows Linger, a moment near the end of Shadows Linger, and you'll notice. Anyway, there's also one other part of the prologue. It's that dog, that wolf god. I think that dog is Tog, the sort of god that people swear by and is mentioned here and there. I don't know for sure. It's not named. It could be. It could also not be. I'm just thinking of it as Tog for now, but I might be completely wrong. But the thing I like about the prologue is that it rewards you for paying attention and understanding, because so many prologues are a long hold, where it's like end of the book or like 5 books later you find out what it means. And there's aspects of that here, but this series is overwhelming you with so much information that I kind of appreciate that some things pay off immediately. You pay attention, you understand what's happening, and you get to the present, and you're just already like, yeah, okay, the K'chain Shamal are free now, and, Kalava is a character that's going to show up, and, maybe even it seems like one of the Jaguts she accidentally sealed might have gotten out and might be the entity that's controlling the Panian Seer, if I'm reading those implications right. And, Kalor and Karul's curses are very relevant to the present-day plot, And, the Sister of Cold Nights having a very significant name, and like all those, Draconis having made Dragniper. I kind of wonder if Draconis is the one that Ganos talked to when he was visiting inside Dragniper. And of course, the wolf god, who I think is Tog, being the one to sort of free Talk from being trapped in the Warrens and, set him on a path that benefits that wolf god. And a lot of those things have paid off. I already understand kind of what's going on. There's more to be learned, but I sort of understand the relevance. But that wolf god, I need to know like what's going on there. I need to know like, it's someone killed, its mate is missing and it's been searching this whole time, and so its homeland was killed. They say its homeland was killed, is that referring to where the chained god landed? Or is that referring to like, what was it, to what Kalor did to Jakaruku? I don't know. And, I don't even know if every continent's name has stayed the same, or if it turns out that Corelwi or Jakaruku are actually like the same continent as some of them we've seen in the present. I don't know. And, oh my god, the mysteries in this book. So during book 1, for the first 25% of the book and a bit after, I was obsessing over the mysteries. I had like a full mental conspiracy board trying to track all the connections. Like, there's so many things with like, Dasim Ultor was the sword of the first empire, as in the sword of the first human empire, but then he was also just doing stuff with the Malazan Empire, because in the prologue of Gardens of the Moon, Ganos is like, is it true Dasim died? And they're like, how does this kid know that? And, it's like, there's so many connections, and I'm certainly forgetting to mention all of them. But I was thinking at one point that this video would maybe be oriented around the mysteries itself, and sort of trying to do a conspiracy board kind of thing where I would, go beat by beat every single mystery and what I was thinking about it, going down to like the individual sentences, because believe me, while reading some of these chapters, I was poring over, rereading some individual sentences, figuring out what they were trying to figure out, what they were implying. And I'm not doing that video for two reasons. One is because it would just take too long for me to go back. Like, I didn't take perfect notes, so I would have to go back and I would basically have to reread the first half of the book to just like remember what the individual sentences and their implications I wanted to call out were. So that's just not worth it. I should just keep reading. I'll get answers eventually. And the other thing is, that was sort of how I was feeling during the first 25% of the book, through book 1. But after book 2, I think the mood has settled down a bit in a way where it's not that I still don't have many questions, but I now know, I have a better view of what I know and what I'm not supposed to know. Whereas for the first 25%, so many things were sort of being figured out by me that it was like, I was just having to keep track of like, what things am I supposed to know or not? And like the line between those was very blurry. And now it's like, I know what's a mystery that I have to wait for later on, and I know what I know now, and I just don't feel as much of a need to go full conspiracy board. But it was really fun. Like, to be clear, I enjoyed that process a lot of like it overwhelming me into barely having an idea of what I knew or not. And all of that said, I do have to talk about some of the mysteries, and one of the biggest ones is, arguably, it's arguable whether it's a mystery or not, but the big thing I'm thinking about is the timeline of the gods. And I know this is not as necessary. Like, this is not required understanding for this series, but so Karul is the source of all magic and all Warrens, and, how elder is an elder god? Because, like, the prologue is like 100,000 years ago, and, like, elder gods, I think it says in the prologue that a lot of elder gods were already dead by then. Like, I assume Karul is a god far beyond just a human context. I assume he was far before humans. I don't know, like, I'm sure he can, like, appear as a human. I don't know. Is that how it works? But, how old is he? Is an elder god there from before all the elder races, or just, like, is he a god of one of the elder races? Maybe a god of, like, what was the fourth elder race? Now I can't remember. There's the Jagut, the Talan, the Kachain Shamal, Forkrulasail. Maybe he was friends with the Forkrulasail. But, so, that's just a possibility. But, here's the thing. Maybe he's that old, but how does that factor in with Dark? Because Dark is supposed to be the beginning of everything. They're sort of like metaphorical to the universe itself, like everything came out of Dark, and that's like cool, but Dark is also a Warren. So like, how is there, and we have the whole discussion of how houses were holds, and holds were before houses. Before holds, there was nomadic life, and so the entrance to the Dark Warren is a cart. But then, which came first? Because Karul would be before Warrens, and like, I don't know, and like, maybe Dark came before Karul, but it wasn't a Warren yet, and it just did sort of being fit into that Warren structure as something Karul imposed upon it. that's a possible explanation because, like, there's possible explanations here. I'm not saying that, like, this is a plot hole, it doesn't make sense. I'm just saying, like, it hasn't given me definite information. And one possibility is that there isn't a definite answer. Like, I've seen fantasy series where the way it works is that there's, like, competing explanations for the origin of the universe from different mythologies, and they're both true. And it could be that kind of thing because of how much human belief factors into this. Because I really like that concept of how, like, warrens are inherently kind of derived from houses and holds as spaces you can enter. That's so cool. And you can tell that that's one of those things, like, yeah, this series came from an anthropologist. He's thinking about how important shelter was to sort of our existence and how we think about this world, having somewhere to retreat to. And yeah, it's fascinating. And, you know, part of what that relates to is there's that whole conversation about the Deck of Dragons and the Azath houses, and that drove me insane. I was rereading those paragraphs, trying to make sense of it. Like, I was trying to think, like, how does this work? Like, because it doesn't seem like there's a one-to-one, like, it doesn't seem like there's a bijective relationship between Decks of Dragons houses and Azath houses, or, like, warrens, because, like, I don't think it's like there's a pre-existing Azath house for every warren when, like, we just saw a new one form for Omtos Falak, I guess. That's, like, was there just not one for that all along? And I don't know, it's, what if, like, a warren just stopped? Like, what if this, because we know there's long forgotten houses from the Deck of Dragons. What if, like, is the Azath houses for those just still there? I don't know. It feels very vague. And the thing is, that way lies madness, because at a certain point I was like, I need to stop worrying about this because it's not supposed to make sense in, like, a bijective one-to-one relationship way, because Silver Fox literally explains these are two different systems for imposing order upon magic. And it's like, yeah, no duh, they're not going to be perfectly parallel, or else they'd be the same system. And yeah. And side note, I realized I don't fully understand what happened with Icarium. I thought I did at the end of Deadhouse Gates, but then I thought about it and I realized I don't. And I talked with Duck about this, but I don't think he gave me a straight answer. But, so Icarium attacked a Azath house, and he broke a warren, and he went insane. And the thing is, he did it, I think, because he wanted to free Gothos, which Gothos didn't necessarily want, but that was how Icarium saw it. But is that the same event? Because when you think about it, like, if he wants to free Gothos, he would have to attack an Azath house, but then, like, we also know that Tremorlor is there to seal the warren that Icarium broke. So was Tremorlor already there, or did it just show up to destroy to seal the warren? But if it did, then, you know, were they two different incidents? And, like, you know, I don't know. It's the details are not fully clear on that, but I'll let that go. That's not even in this book, although Gothos's brother is relevant to this book. And the other thing about the timeline I was thinking about is the wolf god. I think it's Tog. You know, I think it says in the prologue it's older than those elder gods, which kind of makes sense because, like, beasts came before intelligent species, but then Karul is supposed to be first, but maybe Tog just came, like, before warrens and magic. That could be fair. But then does that relate to how the Talana Mass used to have beast gods because they had a hold of beasts, which is now empty? And maybe, you know, Ganos was looking at it a lot. Maybe that's the one he'll fill when he becomes Big Boss again. I don't know. Or Big Boss, not again, just in the first place. But then, like, that would be, I think Karul is older than, like, the Talana Mass stuff, so that would be after, but I don't know. I don't know. And again, like, this stuff might have answers. I just don't know what those answers are. And, you know, it might also not have definite answers, and that's fine too. It's just fun to ask. And I sort of liked Malazan's approach to vague magic stuff, because I feel like a lot of stuff that goes for this vague magic approach, I don't like how it, I don't like that handling where it's like, they just say, like, objectively, magic cannot be scientifically defined in a way where it's like, if you put a little magic under a microscope, that little bit of magic gives you the finger and intentionally acts inconsistently, where I mean, like, some people hate magic with rules and they want it to feel that way, but I find that feeling comes best through this approach that Malazan is doing, where it's not that we're putting it against a microscope, it's just that the information we can even get about it at all is hard to interpret. That, I think, is just a lot more compelling. Anyway, so that was a whole ass speech about my going insane about magic in this, but should talk about plot lines. Yeah, again, the Karul scene with Kalor was great, and, you know, Kalor is just in the present. That's funny. I think let's start by talking about Grundle, because Gruntle is, a perfect example of what I was saying, where just, the prose has gotten very good at pulling you into a character immediately, and it feels like, I don't even need to give a long explanation of why Gruntle's good, because, like, why Gruntle is good. It's something that justifies itself. There's no, like, analyzing why Gruntle works. Him working is, like, the first thing about him. It's blatantly apparent, and if you don't like him, you're not going to be convinced why. It just means you don't vibe with that personality, but it's not about what the personality is. It's just about how well realized the personality is through the prose and his perspective. And I just really enjoyed him, and I feel stronger about, like, that base enjoyment. Like, I don't feel the need to call out too many individual scenes, because it's not about those scenes, it's just about him. Although I do want to say, Stani Manakis, absolutely hilarious. Her gimmick is so funny that, like, she just doesn't comprehend, like, fiction or hypotheticals or sarcasm in a way where I'm like, why haven't I seen this kind of gimmick more before? Like, that's so funny and it feels so obvious. And the thing is, I actually have seen stuff similar, but with a different flavor, because it's kind of similar to how Japanese humor flows, I think, some of it, like manzai style stuff. Like, I love Azumanga Daioh, where that kind of thing uses that same premise where, like, a character doesn't get sort of the point, the sarcasm or whatever, but that usually has a flavor of, like, it's because the character is too dumb to get it, which can be really funny, but Stani Manakis feels it's less like she's too dumb to get it and more like she's smart. Her brain just does not engage with that kind of thing, and she replies to stuff in such, like, a deadpan way, where, like, she's one of the characters that you want to see in, like, a live action adaptation, because they would just be so funny to see someone being that deadpan. And yeah, there's the whole Corbel Brooch and Beauchelain's thing, which, I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere yet. I mean, neat conflict, don't have much to say about them. I know they're kind of like spin-off characters, and Karuli is interesting. It was weird how it went for that sort of, like, mysterious master, who's he working for trope, and then it was just like, yeah, he's working for Karul, that's not a long-term mystery. And it's like, yeah, he's just a good guy working for a good guy, there's nothing suspicious about this. And I'll talk more about that later, but I do find it funny that, like, I was thinking, like, who's Karuli working for? And if I just said it out loud, who's Karuli working for, I would have realized. And there's also the sequence of trying to survive the Kachain Shamal, which was very, thrilling and tragic. And there's something interesting to me about how tragedy is mixed with comedy here, in a way that I think makes it feel more realistic. I like it, but that's not, like, a final take. I'm not giving a take on, like, here's how tragedy should be handled in fiction, and I'm certainly not saying everyone has to like it this way, but this is just a thought where, like, you have the absurd, funny situation of Stani being jealous of Harlow and then deciding to have sex with the Barghast guy, who then has a premature experience before dying in the attack, and then that death it's a horrible tragedy, and it feels inappropriate to even talk about the humor to what happened to him before, but it also feels real for that, because that's life. Death is an absurd thing, and, death doesn't wait for an appropriately somber moment. Death doesn't wait for, like, your serious goodbyes. It just happens, and it can happen right after something kind of funny. And I sort of like how, like, people can cope with death with humor, and the book is giving us an out. The book is saying, yeah, you can cope with death by just, like, his death, by laughing at that situation if you want, and also Harlow's death, of course, and just that whole situation. And I think that giving us that out of that way to cope with the death with humor makes it feel more real and hard-hitting than when a story tries to be like, no, this is completely serious, there's nothing humorous about this, it's a huge, super tragic death. Like, that feels less real than this, and thus this death actually manages to hit harder. And of course, the follow-up, Gruntle and Kapistan, it's been pretty interesting, some interactions, but, I don't have too much to say about those, it's just Gruntle's pretty good. And now, what plotline do I want to talk about next? Let's see, I talked about the Fenner guys, don't have much more to say about them. I do find, Kapistan's world building to be pretty fun. It's very funny how, like, because I'm aware of what Erikson has talked about with, like, Malazan. There's no gender dynamics, but this is a world that generally doesn't have institutionalized sexism, which is not inherent thanks to, it is inherently not inherent to human interaction, but it is also just, like, the presence of magic makes it a lot easier to avoid that in societies. I'm aware of that, and that's the point. And that makes it funny that, like, Kapistan is this weird place for how they don't let women be soldiers, and then, the Grey Swords showing up are just like, yeah, we're recruiting all these women, and you have that character who's kind of rising to the challenge and dealing with tragedy but getting stronger. But, okay. There's the Bridge Burners. So the Bridge Burners are hilarious, this book. They've come so far from Gardens of the Moon, where they were just so bland and their personalities did not stick out. And now I'm just reading like Picker and Her Gang and all that stuff, and it's so good. It's so goofy situations, and the table thing, the story of that table, and then how they steal it again. And the funny when I first read them stealing it back, I thought it was like, oh, maybe this is like a spite thing, like they're finally getting their table back. And then no, it's because they set up that table to cheat at cards, and they want to finally make some money by cheating at cards, and then they fail because Silver Fox painted the new card on the bottom, and it messes, and the deck of dragons has changed now, so the relationships are all different now. And I really like how the whole concept of the Bridge Burners playing cards with the deck of dragons was funny in Gardens of the Moon, and it's funnier here, and I like how the deck of dragons is engaged with as a part of this world. And yeah, their personalities are generally good. They just actually stand out. And then, of course, we have Paran leading them, and, he's doing a thoroughly okay job, not amazing, not horrible. And so I had a very funny experience with this book, because you read the prologue, you have all these, like, looming threats being set up, the Jagut, the Kachange Shamal being freed, and then the Chained God having all this stuff going on, and you're sort of thinking, like, oh my god, there's all these, like, looming, dangerous, eldritch threats. And then very early in Paran's first perspective, you get him talking to Trotz, and Trotz says a bunch of mysterious stuff that feel like they're implying something too, and it's like, oh god, there's another? And then 2 pages later, it's like, nah, Trotz was just messing with them, and thus messing with us, the reader. So for readers like me, who are really trying to keep track of all that, Trotz was like a prank on me specifically, which was really fun. But anyway, so Paran, I think his just general vibe this book is pretty compelling, with like, he's just having a terrible time. I mean, it's not as bad of a time as Felisin, but, I like to think a lot about the Paran family reunion, where Felisin might be able to say, wow, you defecting, Ganos, that really screwed me over, because it's why Tavor had to prove her loyalty by, getting rid of me. And then Ganos, for one thing, he didn't defect on purpose. It was not his agency. But he goes say, like, look, you got to become an actual goddess in charge of everything. I am getting big tummy aches because I'm connected to a dog who's in the realm of darkness, and because I don't know, tummy ache time. Look, tummy aches are a bad time. I don't know. I didn't like Paran. I didn't like Ganos that much in book 1, and I appreciate the point with him that he was this set up to be this protagonistic figure who then immediately has most of his agency taken away from him. And I think it's a good follow-up on that to have him be very, like, now he is a chosen one, but he's a tortured chosen one, and we see how terrible that is for him. And I have sort of mixed feelings about that plotline, but I'm generally optimistic. I mean, just on a personality level, as a 20-something trying to figure out their life and everything, I certainly vibe with him, and just the character writing, the character writing is strong enough to make me vibe with him in that way, where I didn't vibe with him as much in Gardens of the Moon. But, so the thing about him being a chosen one is that I do like a being the chosen one is terrible situation. I like seeing how that's be painful. When it's done well, when it's not just like torture porn. I love Realm of the Elderlings, which I'm sure some would call torture porn, but I disagree with, which is very much a narrative about, that suffering, about, someone being a sort of chosen one, but having a terrible time. And, I like that narrative here, but, the fact that you show someone having all that suffering doesn't change if they are a chosen one. And, Paran might be suffering now, but then if he still just becomes big boss of the deck of dragons and is like a person with all this power and agency, and I don't know if it's going to happen like that or at all or in that straightforward of a way, but if it goes that way, then it's like, even if you suffered, you're still being centered by the narrative. And I don't I want, I like Malazan for the breadth of things, for the fact that it doesn't believe in, great man history stuff, obviously. That doesn't mean it's going to do that kind of narrative with Paran, just that I'm hoping it's handled well, but I am optimistic, and part of the reason I like that is because Paran is, I switch between Paran and Ganos, but he's I should disambiguate a little more because he's not the only Paran, but Ganos is not even like a narratively chosen by the universe chosen one. He's not chosen by fate. He's literally just chosen by Karul. Like, there is the fact that we know the specific entity who is saying, like, yeah, I'm picking you because we need someone to do this job, I think, like, makes it feel more like this is not like a chosen one story. This is just a thing that's happening because someone's got to do the job. And yeah, so I generally enjoyed his perspectives, and he's been involved a lot in some of that lore piecing together stuff, that whole conversation about the Azath houses, and him going into the Azath house and talking to Raced. Oh my god. So I did an earlier version of this where I didn't record it. I was just practicing going through what I wanted to discuss. And I forgot to even talk about Raced. That Raced thing was fascinating. I don't know what I have to say about it. I just want to say it was good. But, looking at all the stuff inside the Azath house was really good. And the conversation with Silver Fox. And of course, his relationship with Silver Fox is fascinating. And it's such an uncomfortable situation where we get to see all of that discomfort. And so I'm a little proud of how fast I figured things out. No, I don't want to toot my own horn. I'm sorry. It's really nothing to brag about. But, it was fun to figure out that there is an elder goddess inside Silver Fox. And I think, there's a gradually increasing progression. There's a gradually increasing progression of how overt it makes it. Where at first it's some very subtle details, and then it gets a little more in your face, and then it gets a little more in your face. And, near the end of what I was reading, there was a Calor point of view where he basically made it a lot more clear. But I think I figured out pretty early in that progression that Nightchill was the sister of Cold Knights, because, there was the name connection and just the fact, and there was. So I think I figured it out before Calor said something about the name itself. I figured it out when Calor was just implying there was something ancient inside of her, and I thought, wait, Nightchill, sister of Cold Knights, and we knew from the prologue that sister of Cold Knights was going to be betrayed and like to act as a normal human. And all of that was, I figured it out, and I'm just saying I figured it out early because I want to say it was really fun to figure it out early, because then every time there was more evidence, I was like, yeah, I think I was right. Oh my god, this is the sister of Cold Knights. I'm sure the earliest you could possibly figure it out is, I bet the Sister of Cold Knights is in the back of the book in Gardens of the Moon as one of the gods it lists, and I'm sure you can notice that connection to Nightchill in Gardens of the Moon, but I noticed it, I'm not that insane. I didn't figure out that Amanus was Kellanvet in book 1. But anyway, so just a really, again, the thing is, you don't need to understand that the Sister of Cold Knights is inside Silver Fox to appreciate this plotline. It can be a mystery. It works both ways. It respects the reader to figure out, and it respects readers that don't care about figuring it out, and I really like that. And in general, we have this plotline with Whiskey Jack, Anamanda Rake, Kaladin Brood, Krupp, and of course the Mybe, that I've found generally very good, especially early on when it's just fun to sort of read the whole, it's like the crossover episodes, even though most of these guys are from book 1, except the ones we didn't really know yet, like Kaladin Brood, but he even appeared in it. But it's even though, they were from the same book, they didn't interact much, and now it's the crossover episode, and we get to see these personalities clashing in the conversations, and Whiskey Jack wanting to defend Silver Fox, and all these fun dynamics and interesting scenes, and of course Krupp confusing the hell out of everyone, where, I'll talk more about Krupp later, but I really like how he's handled, but it's just really enjoyable stuff to read. And, Corlat and Whiskey Jack's relationship is fun. And I do think as this plot went on, as they sort of marched toward Capistan, I didn't enjoy them as much. And it wasn't bad, it just wasn't fun in the same way as the earlier part. And I think a lot of the later chapters in this plot weren't really meant to be fun in the same way, because it's, they're having a bad time. And we, when the Trigall Trade Guild shows up, it's this is a rough time. But the thing I like about Krupp is that he's not, because I've talked at length before about why he's so fun, but he's a kind of does he see behind the curtain of this being a story at all kind of thing. And I think I like that he's able to throw off and confuse everyone from Anamanda Rake, who's what's this guy's deal, to just with Quick Ben being how are you cheating at gambling, which was so fun. But at the same time, he's not infallible. At one point, when he's talking to Dujek, and Dujek successfully pisses Krupp off by insulting him for his weight, which is a little mean, but Krupp, I don't know, Krupp gets annoyed. And I sort of like that, the fact that Krupp is so inexplicable to so many people and seems so not all knowing, but knowing of the strangest things, the most important things, the fact that he's also human and fallible, and was floating in the air with the table and stuff, I think. The fact that he's human makes those interesting aspects stand out even more, where if it's okay, it doesn't feel like he just has plot armor where he's always right about everything and infallible, and that makes it all more interesting that he's still able to do all that stuff. And of course there's the Mybe. There's so the Mybe, I think, really epitomizes for me what I'm sort of talking about with how this book does not characterize through arcs. This book characterizes through prose, where we do not get a full arc of the Mybe and how she started, and how she gradually realized what was happening, and how she gradually coped with what she's losing. We just jumped in when she's already coping, and we fill in the fact that we don't have that arc with just the fact that the fact that the prose is so strong at illustrating this picture of a character. And I don't think I love the Mibe. I know one of my friends on the podcast we do about this loves the Mibe. I'm not quite as Mibe-pilled, but I think that just, when you write this way, is more dependent on personal resonance with the character than if it was more like arc-driven. And I think that's fine, that works, but I also feel like I can tell that like there's a version of the Mibe story that's more focused on her and sort of spends more time on a full arc that I would be more compelled by. But of course, it's not about every character's individual arc, it's about the whole. And yeah, the Mibe's conflict is pretty compelling. Some of the Mibe stuff is pretty confusing to me, and I think it's supposed to be confusing. But when she has visions of the past and is like talking to bonecasters, it's pretty unclear to me what it means. Where like I'm not sure if the bonecasters are trying to get her to accept her death, or they're trying to help her escape her death and she just doesn't understand it. And we have all these discussions of death, where like at one point she is talking about what she's realized the afterlife is, but then Whiskey Jack calls her out and says, no, the afterlife is not all pain. You're just viewing it that way because you're in such a pessimistic perspective. And she's like, dang it, Whiskey Jack. Dang it, he's right, I am just being pessimistic. But that sort of colors how a lot of death stuff in general is handled in this book, where there's something going on with this book with death. Maybe that's a theme. Maybe as I do this discussion, I'm realizing a theme, but I certainly don't know what the theme is saying yet. But we have a lot about what happens to people after they die. We have some lore stuff where we sort of talk about like, spirits sort of create an afterlife and sort of take in those of their species or culture or whatever that die. And we have like the Talanamas not having that anymore because they abandoned, their warrens, their hold of beasts in favor of the Talan warren that sort of keeps them immortal. And now when they die, they have nothing left. And we have sort of Corbel Brooch and Beauchelane being necromancers, and the stuff with the Barghast is pretty confusing to me in that, here's the thing about the Barghast. Either there's a reason that they try to seal away their dead in the trees and don't let them escape, and like even if they do escape, they prevent them from coming to talk to them. Either there's a reason for that, or it's just like a massive unforced error, because Quick Ben frees one, and that one immediately says, yeah, so they were really stupid for sealing us all away, because if we weren't sealed, we'd be able to like ascend to godhood and just benefit our people. And I'm like, okay, then why does their culture even do that? And maybe there's a reason. I don't know if it's a reason which is like why the culture eventually developed into that, even though it wasn't optimal, or there's just another side to why they don't want that, because, maybe that'll get answered. But at the moment, it's like, it feels like a little weird. Like, I'm not like, it's hard for me to get invested in like solving this problem when I don't understand why it was a problem in the first place. And then it's complicated by how like the Barghast and the Moranth disagree about their history and who remembers their history right. And I still know so little about the Moranth, and we get some lore drops that are pretty fun with the, like, they were Talanamas that didn't make it to the Talan ritual, and then they bred with Toblakai and with humans, and then they went on the seas and fought a war on the seas with the Taistadur who ruled the seas. All that's pretty interesting. I think there's more details that were interesting to think about, but I'm not going to go over all of it right now. Also, we learned the name of the other race, the Taistalians. They're the ones of light, so I'm glad we finally got that. I really needed that information. So there's also kind of Quick Ben's plot that's not that developed, but I find it kind of funny how we learn, like, wow, things with the Chained God are really bad from Kaladin Brood and Animander Rake. Like, in a few decades, this is over, and they're just trying to, like, do what good in the world they can in the meantime. And Kaladin Brood, I might be remembering the details wrong, but he has this hammer that could kill Burn, but he's refusing to do it because he doesn't want to kill everyone on Earth, but, like, either way, the Chained Gods thing is, and he has that conflict going on. And then, meanwhile, Quick Ben just finds out, independent of them, and he's just like, you know what? I'm gonna deal with this. I got this, guys. He's Quick Ben. Maybe he's just got it figured out. And I'm not saying I fully believe he's gonna solve this book, but it would be kind of funny if, like, Quick Ben just able to find a solution that those guys couldn't, because we do set up that he is very good at finding creative solutions to things, like how he uses some, like, bugs to free that Talamandus, I think his name was. He frees him through that. And, yeah, and then he kind of makes it over to the Barghast place, which is a fine plot. I don't have a ton to say about it, because that's sort of a Malazan moment where, like, Trotz has his own story, And we're really just getting this one moment in Trotz's story. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it's a little boring for me because I just don't have the context to appreciate it, but it wasn't bad. Although I do find it kind of weird how it's like Trotz's healer just coming back and healing him from the duel counts as victory, because by the like trope, you'd normally expect that kind of thing to like count as cheating, but they're just chill with it, I guess. And the Barghast they're funny, but in a way where I'm like, there's a dark side to how assertive they are about sex that I feel like, I don't know if it'll dig into that or if it'll say that's actually a problem, but I don't want to say like, oh yeah, funny, like, you know, muscular tribe people that just want to have sex with you, because for one thing, that's like a weird exploitative trope, like that I don't think that it's necessarily going for here. I think it's more nuanced than that, but it also is just like not always a good thing for like, you know, when we have I forget her name, but the one who's like telling, I think the Shield Anvil, we are going to have sex. It's like funny that the Mortal Sword's like, sorry man, you got to give up your vow and have sex with her, but it's also like, you know, it's one thing for like Ikovian's boss to say like this, like getting information from her is more important, and Ikovian agreeing to that. It's another for her like just saying like you don't have any choice in the matter, which is like there's a dark side to that I don't, that's like a little uncomfortable, even though it leads to funny scenes. And let's see, what else is there to talk about? I know I have to talk about Talk and Lady Envy, but I'm just checking in my notes to see if there's anything I want to cover. I might be forgetting some things. Oh yeah, there's stuff going on with Treach, which kind of relates to the Talk plot, but I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Treach, because we saw him die, but it also seems to be setting up that he's going to get resurrected and be, you know, a second god of war, and, you know, that's happening, I guess. But so, Talk the Younger has willpower. He's got composure. I mean, look, Lady Envy is a fun character where there's some moral, I'm not even going to say moral grayness, I'm saying moral darkness to her. She just straight up keeps people as slaves, but, you know, it's a almost sitcom-y fun dynamic, you know, the tension there, the flirtations, and how Talk has to resist it. And I'm sure many readers, you know, that are tempted are like, oh, I would have just, you know, taken the kiss and become her slave. And, you know, I think that's a fun dynamic, specifically because Talk resists it. And it's not because Talk is like a smart, like, oh, above being attracted to women. It's because Talk understands that if he gave in, she would get bored with him within a week. And, you know, the only reason she's doing this is because he's not giving in. You know, if it was just like, here's this sexy lady who wants to have sex with the Talk, it'd be like, okay, cool, but I'm reading epic fantasy series, I'm not reading smut. But it's because we have that tension there, then we got humor out of it, and just an engaging dynamic. And obviously there's dark sides to it, but, you know, that doesn't mean we can't laugh about it. And in general, that cast of characters is just really fun. With the, I don't know if it, like, my friends say Segula, I was thinking Segula, I don't know, Segula, but Tool is really fun, and just that whole group, fun dynamics. The concept of the Segula is really fun because you meet them and it's like, okay, another warrior tribe in the Malazan setting, so many of those, and then you're like, hang on, no, these guys are like a big deal. Like, yeah, when they sent 3 people as an army, they meant it, and it's a fun dynamic. They're fun characters. It's kind of like Gruntle, where, I mean, there's scenes I could go open up the chapter summaries and refresh myself and say, this scene was fun, but I don't have time to do that. I'm just kind of telling you they're fun in general. Tool is fun in general, and it was just a fun plotline to follow, I guess. And there's mysteries I got to think about. I mean, you know, they engage with the Kachain Shamal stuff a lot. They engage with Treach stuff. Kalava shows up, and all those things are elements that I have my eye on, and I've thought about the details. There's the Baljag stuff, which is really confusing to me, in part because what's the deal with, like, Karul said that he gave Baljag another broken soul to bond with. Who is that soul? Like, that's something that's already happened, right? Who? I'm so confused. And then there's also like Tool giving our guy Talk a name that's like Stone, something like relating to Obelisk or like Menhirs, which is just like, there's something going on there, but I don't even know what to make of it yet. But it's a fun dynamic, and, you know, they get into the Panyan domain, we have those interactions. The dogs are really cool. The other one is named Garath. And then we get to Talk leaving, which is kind of funny that, like, he wanted that badly to avoid Lady Envy, but it's really about he had to get to where he's going, and he needed to, you know, scout what's going on here. But I find it weird that we just skip over his time with the Tenascauri, and that gets into a lot of things. For one thing, it just seems like it's a major side of this whole book's plot that I'd like to have seen more, and maybe we'll see it more later, but it feels like we missed an opportunity. But it's also that I don't really know what Memories of Ice is saying with this conflict yet. And that's not me saying it's not saying anything, it's just that I don't know yet. But, I think the question of what is Malazan really saying about empires is one that's I've sort of been asking for this whole series. And I'm willing to give it time, of course. And I think Guardians of the Moon did a great job of showing, the Darujhistan side. And, you're rooting for Darujhistan to not be conquered. And then Deadhouse Gates, I think Duck made the point to me in one of our discussions that Guardians of the Moon tells you there's two sides to all these conflicts, and then it says, like, okay, you already know that. You don't need to have that said again in Deadhouse Gates. That's already established. And I think that works. And I think Deadhouse Gates not really putting much focus on the Seven Cities Rebellion itself and Seven Cities people is fine, because I think it's just not the story it was really about. And I think the compelling thing about the Chain of Dogs plotline is sort of that the Chain of Dogs works to me because it is divorced from a sense of righteousness, because it is about how they deal with these really hard questions of having to survive, and it isn't giving you the out of viewing their war as righteous, because you know that the Chain of Dogs is not able to just say, oh, these are the bad guys, we're doing a righteous war killing them, and it's solely about their own survival. That's how it's able to hyper-focus on all those difficult questions and those brutal emotions and looks at the darkest sides of humanity, in that they're not really able to justify themselves as good guys in the conflict. They just still have to do what they have to do to protect all the people, even the people that kind of suck, like the nobles. All of that said, we have two sides of this conflict. We have, the Chained God and, the Panian Seer and the Kachain Shamal Mother and all of that. The Chained God is using them, and the Kachain Shamal Mother seems like she's allied with the Panian Seer, who I think might be one of the Jagut that Kalava sealed in the Rent. But that's just a guess so far. Right? It's not proven. But at any rate, we have the magical side of the conflict, which can, of course, have thematic resonance with everything. But we also just have, there's an empire that maybe is a little more morally questionable than the Malazan Empire, in considering, the cannibal peasant army. But ultimately, they're just another empire. They're expanding. And we're like having the union of all the good guys to try and do something about them. And in terms of just like political, in terms of what we can connect to our own history and to empires, I'm not clear on what it's saying yet. And part of why I don't like skipping over the Teniscowry stuff, though maybe we'll get more with them later, is that I feel like that's a super important side of the story to tell, the people who are both a tool and a victim of the Panian domain, and sort of the way they see the world and what they do. I think we could have spent more time with that. But that isn't to say that it's, the book can't say anything. And that sort of brings me to something I felt weird, but then sort of feel better about by the end of book 2, which is that the conflict is odd. It felt odd at first. Now it feels better, but we spent a lot of time in this book focusing on sort of uniting all the good guys against this threat. Good guys, obviously it's more complex, but I'm just saying good guys is a shorthand because, they're protagonistic and they're probably better than the Panian domain, but obviously it's, more gray than that. But, we have so much time focusing on getting all the good guys together. We have, uniting, One Arm's host with Kaladin Brood's forces and the Rivi and Moonspawn and Lady Envy's down there, and Karul is helping with all of this, and the Segula are coming up to beat the piss out of the Segula's reasons. The fact that they were like, hell yeah, come invade us so we can do a war, and the Panian domain just gets confused. That's so funny. Anyway, like the fact that, we're spending all this time uniting the good guys, and for a while it's like, hang on, are the bad guys even that much of a threat? Because for a while it's like, yeah, the Kachain Shamal are dangerous, but Lady Envy, the Segula, they can beat them up. Kalava beats them up, and yeah, the Talana Mass are dying to them 20-1, but they're winning those fights. There's more Talana Mass than Kachain Shamal, at least for now. And all of that's to say, like, we're setting up so many, like, reasons to think the good guys are going to win before we've actually set up why the bad guys are a threat, and it feels weird. Like, it's like, it can't be that easy, but it also is a weird way to set up a tragedy or a loss. Like, if I was to set up, just this side of the campaign, their armies failing, like, the Chain of Dogs, I wouldn't set it up by sort of hyping us all up at the start in this way. I mean, that's not to say it can't be done this way, just that it felt weird to me, and part of the reason it felt weird to me is how much information we get about the fact that Karul is planning everything. Because, like, there's fantasy series that reveal at some point that some god was scheming things and, messing with events, both for good purposes and bad purposes, but it's not an uncommon trope that a god is, influencing things for their plan. And usually that reveal comes later, and especially we don't get to see the specifics of what they're doing. It's more that we retroactively learn that those things they had a hand in. And then at the same time, it's like, that's usually handled in a way where, if we already know from the start that a good guy god is scheming to help things, then that sort of takes away a lot of the tension. And it makes it weird, because then if they win, then it's like, you played your hand too early. If they're going to win because of that, you should have revealed it later. But if they're going to lose, then it's like, I wish you played it more ambiguously, because it just feels like disjointed if you set up all these reasons they'll win and then they don't. And I do think that's handled a little better, because by the end of book 2, we do get more of that stuff that's like reasons to consider the Panion Domain a threat. We see a little more of like, okay, the chained god, Mr. Chains, messing with the Warrens is actually causing a lot of problems. And we see like, okay, there's a Jagut behind the Panion Seer, and maybe we're underestimating how much of a threat he is. With Talk getting in prison, which sucks for him. That's a little bit of like, okay, like it's that tease I was waiting for of like, maybe it won't be that easy. Maybe this villain is actually pretty scary. But that said, like, it's weird to tell us so overtly early on that this is just like, yeah, Karul is scheming, and the Chained One is scheming, and, again, it's just like, you usually do that reveal later, maybe even later in the series as a whole. It's weird to get that book 3, and maybe the reason we can get that in book 3 is that Karul is going to die in this book and fail, and, failing is a way to go, but more specifically than that, I just feel like the fact that it's giving us so much information so early means that the way to look at how this is all going to play out is more complicated than just the good guys will win or the good guys will lose. I think that it's not going to necessarily be on that axis. It's not going to be like who won the fight. It's like, kind of like how in the end Gardens of the Moon wasn't about whether Raced or Animander Rake won the fight. They just dealt with it in a different way, and then it kind of ended with a defection by Dujak's host, which was of course fake. We got the full details on that here after it was kind of pretty much said in Deadhouse Gates. But it's like I'm thinking and expecting and hoping and predicting that the ending has a lot more to it of what it's saying than just like a loss or a failure for the armies here, because I feel like that just doesn't jive with the way it's setting up information now. If it wants to just be like, we win or we lose, then it shouldn't have told us this early about how Karul is planning all these things. And again, who I don't even know how it's going to be structured long term. And I think that's most of what I have to say about Memories of Ice so far. I have surely missed things. There's funny scenes, there's interesting things, there's bits of lore I've theorized about that I just forgot about to mention right now, or I just don't think are necessary to make time for, or I just don't want to like pour through the book and note every scene down and make sure I mention all of them. I've mentioned most of the parts I think I need to mention, but if I didn't mention something, it's not because I didn't think about it or didn't theorize about it or didn't find it entertaining. It just, didn't get mentioned. Simple as that. There are plenty of lore things that I went down rabbit holes trying to dissect what they mean and piece together the information I was being given that I haven't talked about here. I mean, there's stuff to do with the history of Burn, and what was that other thing I was thinking of? There's all this stuff with like, how can the Chained God just like add a new Warren, and what's it seems like there's a connection between the House of Chains and the House of Shadows. That's something. And there's, Gethel defecting, and then Calor seems like he's defecting. Look, there's things I haven't mentioned, and I'm reading, trust me, I'm reading the book. I'm paying attention to everything. I feel like you don't need to be a hyper-attentive reader to enjoy this series, but that's how I like to read stuff like this. But yeah, other than the sort of stuff I just talked about, I don't feel like I have a ton of predictions, because I don't know how it's going to go. All these things are set up, but, I don't believe in too many predictions. I think stories are usually, unless, especially the more complex a story is, the less standard it's written, which this is definitely not written in a standard way, but, with this kind of story, I don't think you can predict things. I think there's always going to be multiple ways an author can go, and thus, the idea that if you see the first half, there's a guarantee of how it's going to go, maybe sometimes there is, but it's usually too subtle for you to notice, and even then, there's multiple options, because it's not just about what's happened before, it's about the plan for later. And anyway, that's to say, I'm not giving you like, here's my outline of what I think happens in the rest of the book, but I think this was hopefully a good summary of where I am on the book, what I'm enjoying about it, some of my general takes. And, next time you hear from me about it, I will have finished the book and I'll be doing a more full discussion with the others hopefully that discussion will not go for too long, in part because I've given all of these takes at the moment here. But see you later.